Officials from APEC countries are set to meet Tuesday. That's when they're expected to sign agreements on everything from corruption to food safety. But the issue is likely to spur more debate is the way forward on the Pacific Rim trade negotiations. And Nathan King joins us right here on the desk this Friday with much, much more. This is a big deal.
It is a big deal. And as you said, Phil, there are 21 economies meeting, but the two will dominate, the US and China, of course. And at this APEC, we're at a crossroads on whether the region can replicate the last amazing quarter of a century of growth. All agree on APEC's vision of free trade for the region in the 2020s. But what trade policies to put in place and who should lead the way, that is the question. In this year's promotional video for the APEC Forum, the organisation marks 25 years of boosting trade and investment, and it has reason to celebrate. Since 1989, it says tariff levels have been cut by 2/3, and that the Pacific Rim has seen its wealth double to more than $30 trillion. The question for APEC is, how does the region that accounts for nearly half of global trade keep growing when there are growing differences over its direction? Host China has secured agreement by APEC ministers to study what is known in trade circles as FTAP, or a free trade area of the Asia-Pacific. The United States has been pushing for a different regional free trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. It's currently being negotiated by 12 countries, but not China.
There is a risk that you could get a Asia-Pacific grouping, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and a separate Asia-only grouping, the RCEP, with different rules and different agendas, different membership, although lots of overlapping membership, and that could lead to competing blocs.
The TPP is a tough trade agreement that even some of the US's biggest allies are finding difficult to accept. Japan may have to open its agricultural markets like rice and meat to foreign competition. There's also strict rules on intellectual property, market access and state-owned enterprises. Some economists say those provisions make it a kind of anybody but China trade agreement. China has recently said it would like to talk about joining, but the process may be too far along for that.
It would have been very hard to bring a big country like China into the negotiation at that point. At the same time, I think the Chinese concern is understandable.
There are also differences when it comes to investment in infrastructure for the Pacific Rim. Last month, 20 economies and China signed a pledge to create a Beijing-backed Asia Investment Infrastructure Bank. And it was widely reported that the US had lobbied allies such as Australia to stay away from the launch of the bank. Strategic mistrust between the US and China has been a focus for discussion this week in Washington as policymakers and experts prepare for APEC and the Beijing summit between the Chinese and US presidents. Many say only leadership from the top can provide a breakthrough.
What the Chinese are proposing and what the Americans are proposing are both aimed at achieving the same goal, which is deep economic integration.
And as for that Trans-Pacific Partnership, it is by no means a done deal. If the US gets all 12 countries negotiating to sign on, a free trade agreement will still have to get the approval of the US Congress. And as we saw this week in the midterm elections here in the US, President Barack Obama's party lost control of the Senate. So now more than ever, President Obama will have to rely on his political rivals to help deliver one of his key initiatives for the rebalance of Asia.
Yeah, and I don't want to stray too far from this, but there's the politics here in Washington that you hinted on, but there's also the politics of this deal because China has the free trade zone. America has sort of the TPP, even though they're not the official sponsors of it, but they're basically rival plans. And my question to you is, can they work together, or does one have to die?
The Americans say they're not rival plans, although it does feel like that at the moment. What they're saying is, what's the best way to get to what the Chinese want, the free trade area of the Asia?
China's not involved in the TPP.
Exactly, but remember, China has also said that it's willing to discuss it. Now, there has been some not yet pushback from Washington saying, well, you know, let's get the 12 countries in it already negotiating because they're having problems with Japan, and China can come in later. Now, if you were sitting in Beijing, would you agree with that? Would you see that as a plausible option? So there's going to be this study about the free trade area. And remember, TPP is a very, very strict agreement. And if Japan does not follow through, and it may not, considering the problems the Abe government has in selling it to his own governing party, then what's going to happen here in America? Remember, we're entering the presidential cycle soon. If they don't lower tariffs on things like pork, beef, rice, where's the presidential heartland? Where do you have to win here in the US? Iowa, where all the pork is. Exactly. Michigan, where all the cars are.
We'll send Jessica Stone there. This is her wheelhouse.
So my final point is basically, Phil, is that if the Japanese don't get on board and lower tariffs for automobiles and agricultural products very quickly, then we get into the presidential cycle here, and there is no way you can win as a politician running for TPP without the Japanese on board and lowering tariffs. And maybe APEC will kind of find a middle ground. They're good at doing that. 21 economies, very different views, but look at the growth that the region has seen over the last quarter of a century. Very interesting.